Hey, you awesome folks! Thanks for taking this journey of discovery with your guide, Keith Haney. You're listening to the Becoming Bridge Builders podcast, your favorite podcast for everything from racial reconciliation to education innovation, justice reform, and leading change in the 21st century. This podcast is for people who love to be challenged with difficult topics, but want practical solutions to solve these challenging issues. Becoming Bridge Builders makes change possible. Each week on the podcast, Keith invites innovative thought leaders to share how they are building bridges in their area of expertise. You will hear breakthrough ideas and concepts that are changing the world. He's featuring guests who are best-selling authors, leaders at Microsoft, entrepreneurs, leading educators, professors, lawyers, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can be the bridge to the change you are seeking.
My guest today, Justin Foster, is the co-founder of Massive Change, an advisory firm dedicated to supporting business leaders who are called to use their status and brand to take on systemic change. Systemic change. My guest today is Justin Foster. He is a co-founder of Massive Change, an advisory firm dedicated to supporting business leaders who are called to use their status and brand to take on systemic change. In addition, Justin serves as a fractional CMO, a brand poet, and a CMO coach. Along a journey that began on a cattle ranch in Eastern Oregon, Justin has spent 2 decades providing unconventional and often heretical strategic brand coaching to leaders in every sector and industry. Beautiful mistakes, he calls them, instead of manufactured moments. We welcome Justin to the podcast. Well, it's so good to have you on today, Justin. How you doing?
Pretty good, Keith. Good morning.
Well, good morning from lovely Portland.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's probably really early in Portland. What is it, like 7 o'clock in the morning there? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You're worth it.
That's right. Good. I appreciate that. I love to ask my guests this question. So give me the best piece of advice you've ever received.
It's interesting because the advice you get seems to, like, good advice. I've gotten a lot of bad advice.
Yeah, I could join that club too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But when I think about, I always think of what Mr. Rogers said that his mom told him. It's like, when in a crisis, look for the helpers. And there, it was more counsel than advice. And I think that, so I would almost answer this as a cumulative, because I heard this from multiple people around the same time. A couple of them complete strangers. And it was, get into your heart. And I had created a very hard shell as a form of, now in retrospect, trauma buffering. And that had made me successful financially. It made me, at the top of my game. It made me a very hard, unloving person, especially to myself. I was deeply full of self-loathing underneath the arrogance. And so, yeah, get into your heart, which I think about every day.
It's funny you mentioned Mr. Rogers' quote. I just wrote an article for my blog about the shooting at the Lakewood Church in Houston.
Right.
And I used that quote because I wanted to point out that oftentimes when we see those tragedies that happen in the world, people ask the question, where is God and all of that? And it made me think about what that Rogers quote, because oftentimes the heroes are there. We just don't notice the heroes. If it wasn't for the heroes in those tragedies, those things would be a lot worse. And I don't believe those heroes are accidental. I believe that's God interacting in the midst of crisis, in the midst of trauma, in the midst of the most horrible situations in life. There are those heroes. And so I love that quote, because I hadn't heard anybody ever use that quote until you just used it. So it reminded me of the article I just wrote.
That's awesome.
I'm always curious, people like yourself, who are some people that were influential in your life? And, just kind of opportunity to give them a shout out, to kind of thank them for being alongside you, different parts of your journey.
Yeah, I think I grew up in a very unstable is generous. I grew up in a very violent and toxic home life that was added to that being in a fundamentalist cult, as in many ways, poorly run cult, but probably a cult nonetheless, because they were secretive about money and sex and power. So by that definition, that's a cult,
right?
And which could probably apply to a lot of religious groups. But my grandmother was a huge influence on me. She was the only adult that I trusted for probably 20 years. She was kind. She was real. She saw me. And I think about her, she passed a number of years ago, and I think about her often. I've had some amazing friends along the way. My oldest friend, one of my oldest friends is, his name is Phil. And we've been through so much over the years. I met him when I was 17, he was 16, and he's been like a steady source of friendship for so many years. My dear friend Juan, who we've known each other about 15 years, he was my best man at my wedding last year, and he is one of the best men I know. And he's a little older as a father. I think he's in his early 40s. His son is like coming up on 2 years old, and watching him go from being not a dad to a dad has been a beautiful thing. And then my wife, Virginia, we met 3.5 years ago, and she has brought new worlds to me, inside of myself and outside of myself. She's challenged my thinking. She's revealed biases that I didn't know I had. She's a Latina and an immigrant and a feminist activist. All perspectives that I was respectful of, but I did not understand. And I think it's very important in any friendship to, anyone that's been influential, especially now in my journey, is to challenge belief systems that I take for granted because I'm what I call a SWAM, a straight white American male. Each of those things are power centers, they're power dynamics. And I think as I'm 53 now, great friendship is pointing out when people point out to me, hey, you might be wrong about this. You might reconsider that. You might take this perspective. To me, I value that, I think, more than anything right now in my journey.
That's awesome. Let's dig a little bit into some of your stories. So tell us about your personal journey. You talked a little bit about, being part of a cult. How did you get from that to where you are today?
Yeah. So like a lot of people that grew up in fundamentalism, I got married very young. I was 18 when I got married to my first wife, and who's an amazing person. And she lives here. I live in Austin, but she lives in Portland now. And we got to hang out a couple times while I've been here. So we're really close. We're really great friends. We kept the best part of our relationship after we separated and got divorced. And so I got that was a shaping thing, because you get married when you're 18, and you do that with, one of the one of the side effects of trauma is you don't know who you are. So you seek out things to identify, to create an identity. So some people join the military, some people, throw themselves into education, or they go into more negative things. And I just kind of let the church tell me who I was, and crafted this hologram of someone that was perceived to be a certain kind of person, a certain kind of Christian, a certain kind of man. And it wasn't me. And that began to unravel in probably 2010. I started pulling threads and asking questions. And, there's nothing fundamentalists are more afraid of than questions, because questions reveal untruth. And if you're so rigid in your views, and to the point where you name your group the truth, and you're so rigid in your views that when someone starts asking questions, the ego kicks in and they feel threatened. And but I kept doing it anyway, and I started to see things, and then there was this unraveling. But then I had my first spiritual awakening in April of 2014, and then that led to moving to Austin. And a lot of things changed at that point. And then I had this unraveling, kind of a deconstruction, and watching. I wrote this the other day about I'm slowly evolving into a heart. Like I live so heart first now, and it's because all the things I thought were me were stripped away. I realized that a huge portion of my personality over the years was trauma buffering and dopamine chasing. So as a trauma survivor with PTSD, complex PTSD, and someone with ADHD, my life was buffering against the trauma and chasing dopamine. So I had the energy to do things. And,
wow.
In a combination of faith, inner work, and therapy, I feel integrated and whole now. Lots of challenges still, lots of life is challenging. You never stop needing faith. You never stop needing grace. You never stop needing wisdom. It's just the application of those things is so much different now than it was, 10 plus years ago. My career changed too during that time, significantly as well. I'm happy to talk about that too.
So as you think about, I was going to get to that, because as you think about your background, how has that led to what you're doing now in terms of marketing and just kind of helping people to unpack their brand? Because if you struggle to identify who you are, I'm sure you're not the only person, especially like your corporations or companies that come to you trying to define who they are. It must be at least helpful for you to kind of say, okay, let's get beyond what you think you are and get to the heart of who you truly are.
Right. Yes, that's a beautifully said. And I've been doing branding and marketing, consulting, coaching, CMOing for 22 years now. And so it's evolved over the years, both in skill and tradecraft and things like that, but also who I work with. So I work with now exclusively what I call conscious leaders. So these are leaders that have some sort of elevated consciousness. When you elevate your consciousness, it changes a couple of things. It changes how you see people. And it changes the language that you use. Well, those are two huge factors in becoming a brand and becoming, and how you do marketing in an ethical, sort of golden rule sort of way. And so I, and that was kind of born over the last 4 years. I think that kind of stirring started during COVID, and that was a crazy year of news and horrible things, and it kind of bookended for me this kind of awakening of social consciousness, from George Floyd's murder to the pandemic to the election to meeting Virginia to January 6th, and those two horrible things and the three horrible things and one great thing. It produced in me this awareness that if you want to change the system, you got to change how you communicate. You got to change how we talk to people. And so much of branding and marketing is based off an assumption of power. There's no humility in it. There's arrogance and manipulation. There's a lot of Machiavellian views that the ends justify the means. That's why I call most politicians and many religious leaders, I call them grift funnels, because it's all about clickbait and followers and donations and selling or whatever. And we've been given this amazing ability of the neocortex to communicate from the soul, and we use it to sell stuff to people that don't want it, but we manipulate them into buying it. I am very vocal about several things in my life, and that's one of them. That most marketing is gaslighting. At best, it's monetized codependency. And I'm vocal about that. I'm vocal about I sometimes say that I think my mission in life is to make other white people uncomfortable because I'll talk about things they don't want to talk about, especially in business. And I keep my mouth shut about things I don't understand or can't have an experience, but I open it up if it's something that I have experienced or I feel called to express, because I have a Bible verse tattooed on my arm. It's Isaiah 50:4, and which is, you've been given the tongue of the learned to give a word in season to those that are weary. And that's a reminder that my gift of articulation, my gift of poetry, my gift of being able to speak from the soul to the soul, those are not mine. I'm stewards of those things, and I can't use those gifts anymore on trying to sell, software or toothbrushes or something, not that those aren't important. I just don't want to do that work.
Right. For those who may have never heard this term before, could you unpack the term conscious business for us?
Yeah. So when I refer to consciousness, I'm referring it really to more of a scientific view. And there are three kinds of consciousness in my view. There's what I mentioned earlier, social consciousness. And that's sort of seeing systems and power dynamics and patterns. Understanding, for example, in the United States, that still we're greatly influenced in our systems, maybe not in behavior, but systemic white supremacy, systemic patriarchy, systemic church-state influence. You see that with Christian nationalism now. Those are power centers that still very much influence how we live our lives and how we have our view, especially of American history, which is constantly being whitewashed, some pun intended. And so that's social consciousness. And then there's spiritual consciousness. That's Saul, who became Paul on the road to Damascus, or Buddha sitting under the tree, or that sort of enlightenment style, or awakening or receiving something. And then there's mental consciousness. And mental consciousness is a form of, it's kind of like it's a form of intelligence, similar to emotional intelligence, but it's essentially understanding three fundamental things. Number one is that who you think you are, you're not. Most of what your personality is was given to you or told to you through social conditioning. Number two is you are not your thoughts and feelings, because one thing mindfulness or meditation teaches you is you can observe your thoughts and feelings. And if that's true, you're not them. They're things that are part of you, but they're not you. And the third is that you're imbued with wisdom, that there's something within the human kind of DNA, is that we have intuition, and we have wisdom, we have creativity. We can do things that no other creatures can do. So those are the principles of consciousness. You apply it to business then, and that translates into three things as well. Two that I already mentioned. It changes how you treat people, how you see people. It's what I call a namaste approach to business. The divine in me sees the divine in you. So I'm not going to manipulate you, because I don't, that's not what I want. Sort of golden rule, sort of what Jesus taught too. Number two is you changes your language to being much more poetic and direct and clear and soul stirring. And the third is that you organize your brand around your mission, because there's something that's an absolute truth, I believe, which is, and I don't have a lot of absolute truths, but this is one. When you raise your consciousness, it always comes with a social justice component. It always comes with a calling to say, you got to go take on that problem, or you got to go advance humanity in that way. Well, if you're a business owner, that means that you don't get to divide the money from the works. You organize your business around your calling. Most people don't know how to do that. But they're conscious business leaders, and they want to become a conscious business. And conscious businesses have they're very word of mouth driven. They're very innovative. They're very, there's a sort of, they're humble. They're not best kept secrets, because being a best kept secret just means you suck at marketing. And there's a level of excellence within them, but mostly around how they treat people. So that's my definition of a conscious business. There's not that many of them, but there's a few.
So give me an example of how that looks like. So I don't know, maybe not necessarily give me a client, but say for someone like myself who's doing a podcast with the goal of trying to build bridges, how does that does that play out, and how you would describe what you just described?
Well, we can use a couple of like real life examples. They're not clients, but they're very well-known companies. Patagonia, I would say, is a conscious business.
Okay.
When you look at those three things, how they treat people, the language they use, and how they organize around their mission, they're very public about their views, and they take a stand. And I often think of when Michael Jordan was asked back in the 80s, why he didn't get into politics. He said, Republicans buy shoes too. And I contrast that with LeBron, who was very active in his political views, and also a businessman too. And he doesn't separate those things or keep those things secret. And that's another. And Patagonia is like that. They spend marketing dollars to promote, environmentalism as an example, not just to shill products. Tom Shoes, Warby Parker, in many ways, Southwest Airlines. They are a conscious business, and it shows up again in the data where they have very high retention of employees. They have very low customer loss, that they're very loyal customers, and they are constantly at the top of their game. They own the category that they're in. They don't, they're not number two, no, not number three or number four, or something. They own their category. Now, not all category owners are conscious businesses. You can look at Trader Joe's as another example of a conscious business. And again, they have very similar patterns and structures, but it all comes down to the kind of leaders that they have, because leaders set the tone for the culture. And a conscious leader, by her or his nature, is very inclusive and very curious and very open. And these businesses they still have hierarchical structures, but they run much more as a complex adaptive system than a machine. That's another trait of a conscious business. So they seek out feedback, they listen, they tap into the collective intelligence. And so the work that I do with the company I own with Virginia called Massive, we're teaching these kind of things to contemporary business leaders that have had some sort of awakening, and they want to reorganize their business around that awakening or calling.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
And now a word from one of our sponsors, For Freedom Mobile. If you're using AT&T, Verizon, or T-Mobile, then you're being tracked. Mobile providers collect your location, communications, internet activity, even your financial transaction. They sell that data to anyone willing to pay for it and provide it to the government without a warrant. Switch to For Freedom Mobile, and you won't ever have to worry about big tech or Big Brother tracking you through your mobile phone again. For Freedom Mobile provides secure, unlimited talk, text, and high-speed data for just $29.99 a month, and it includes free internet roaming in over 200 countries. Sign up for the service by visiting forfreedommobile.com and using the promo code BRIDGEBUILDERS to get your first month for only $9.99. See forfreedommobile.com for details, just like the number 4, freedommobile.com. I like that. What you described is interesting, because it's like we talk about this and talk a lot in businesses, integrity. How do you build businesses with integrity? Especially in our culture today, there's a lot of divisiveness in the business world. Even those who maybe have good intentions, their good intentions now are hurting other people. How do you balance, I guess I would say, having a strong voice in a social justice movement without denigrating other people to do that?
Well, that's a great question, because I think it's really about doing, there's a saying, and I've adopted it from my dear friend Melissa, who said, "You do you, boo." And there's sort of this like spiritual libertarianism, of like, this is my calling. I'm not telling you what to do. And if you don't like it, I think I don't agree with the views of the Green family that owns Hobby Lobby, but it's a privately held company. If they want to run their business a certain way, that's up to them. Or Chick-fil-A not being open on Sundays. And I also think too is, I'm most of the time is an example of this. We hear the term canceling. We throw that word around. I think of what Mark Moran, the comedian, says is you can say whatever you want, but there's also consequences. And the market opinion is a marketplace. And not all opinions are the same. Not all views are the same. And there is a line. I think, like as an example, the Marriott company never got involved in politics, didn't even give money to politicians and lobbyists or anything like that. But after January 6th, and it's still in place, as far as I believe, is that if you participated in or you were a politician that supported January 6th, you were not allowed to stay at a Marriott hotel anymore, because it was a line for them. They're like, this is anti-American, anti-democracy. And I think that's the nuance, Keith. The nuance is between like tolerance of other people's views and the encroachment upon some value of yours. And for me, this is just mine, if your belief is dehumanizing, if it diminishes someone else's divinity, we're going to have a problem. We're going to have words, because I'm not going to be silent about that. And I'm not telling someone else that you should believe what I believe, but I will tell someone else that things that you believe are hurtful to other people, especially when it's systemic, especially when you perpetuate systemic injustice. And that's why I say stupidity is a form of privilege. Just stupid ideas, but if you have money and status, you're kind of protected from your own foolishness. And there's a lot of that in the business world as well, is that they insulate themselves from social realities. I think of Walmart, which they have the largest percentage of employees that are on government assistance, which is completely unnecessary if they were to pay a more fair wage or allow for unionization or things like that. To me, that's perpetuating an injustice. And I'm a capitalist and I'm not some woke liberal. I do believe that in business, but you also have a moral responsibility to take care of your people. Not just pay them what the market says they're worth based off of your resume. And I think all of that is, we just need leaders. You talked about integrity, that lead with integrity no matter what. No matter, it said that a lot of the companies started to go adrift when we got into shareholder value, that concept of shareholder value, and it started to justify a lot of terrible behavior within companies. This is back in the 60s. And we need to get back to a people-first form of business, or we're going to lose the things that we as Americans most value. And that is not going to come from politicians or traditional institutions, because they caused it. It's going to come from conscious business leaders saying, we're going to lead different. We're going to run our business different. And I want to support them.
Right. For me, I work with a lot of diverse people in my profession. And I've actually been kind of one of the people leading the discussion about diversity, especially in the churches, because I serve in a church body that's mostly Anglo.
Right.
What disturbs me sometimes as I work in this sector is there's so much demonization of the other side.
Yeah.
And we can't move forward if we're demonizing people. So I like what you say about we have to see the divine in people. Mm-hmm. I sometimes think that when we get hardwired into an opinion, we lose sight of the divine in other people. And
yeah, I agree.
If we're not careful with generalizations about people, I think we can fall into they're the bad guys and there's no worth in them. So I think that keeping the divine there, realizing where our identity comes from, is extremely helpful in any conversation. Even when you disagree with someone, is there's a divine in them as well. How do I see that, honor that, and be open to listening. One of the things in my podcast I try to do is I don't always have people on I agree with. Which may anger some of my listeners. They're like, why didn't you tell them this? I'm like, well, because I wanted to hear from them. I wanted to let them get their views out, because, sometimes us having a back and forth is a good way for us to both learn from each other.
Right. Yeah. And I think on that too, is my model for this is Jesus,
Right.
because he, his interactions, like with Peter, he called Peter Satan, that's not nice. But he was pointing out that, again, and he pointed out inconsistencies in behavior. He preached against basically abuse of power, hypocrisy, and waste. His teachings were very simple, but his communication style is, because he saw the divine. I think that's what angered him about this concept of flipping tables. And I don't think you can move humanity forward by just being nice to each other, because that's that passive aggressiveness. Is that sometimes you have to say, I love your soul, so I'm going to flip this table, and I hope that you can see what I'm talking about by challenging you. And the fine line, like you said, about demonizing the other person, of not condemning someone's humanity or divinity, but calling out behavior. And I think that's, he said, judge not lest you be judged. Well, it didn't say not to judge. It just said, do not hold other people to a different standard than you hold yourself. And that's why I say the line is dehumanization, because power structures dehumanize by their nature. And so somebody has to speak up and go, I don't think that's right. And you can look at that over the years of almost any sort of power dynamic, power structure, hierarchy, is that they had this sort of atrophying or law of entropy, where they became more dehumanizing, and it took people like Martin Luther to spark the church forward, or St. Francis of Assisi, or later on Martin Luther King Jr. as examples of this, what we call history shapers, that are constantly, and it's that pull between institutional stability and evolution towards good. It's a quote, often assigned to Martin Luther King Jr. He quoted it, but wasn't his quote. And that is, the arc of time is long, but always bends towards justice. It bends towards justice because people say something, they do something. It doesn't, and I believe this, Keith, in all my bones, is no one's mission is to keep things the same. No one's mission is to be apologist for an institution's horrible behavior. That's not your mission. That means you are afraid of the truth. And people that are afraid of the truth don't change anything. And so that's where that fine line is for me. And I got to be careful, because sometimes I get, I'm an 8 in the Enneagram, and I'm a Scorpio. Like I want to fight you, and I'm full of fire, but I have to be in my heart. So even before I say something now, I check my heart. It's like, am I saying this because I'm bored and I need dopamine, or I just like to stir stuff up because that's just my nature? Or is it my heart saying, no, you have to say this, Justin? And I try to keep that. I fail a lot, but I try to keep that.
Right. Yeah, I've worked, most of my ministry has been in urban areas. And so I've seen the effects of broken systems. The one that really hits me the hardest, because we had a school at our church for years, was the education system in poor neighborhoods.
Yes.
And the fact you talk about, like, no one wants to change the system. Nobody wanted to give parents an option to send their kids to better schools or improve the schools. Right. And so I watched as young kids just gave up on their future because they didn't see any hope.
Right.
And so how do we have that conversation about how do we fix a broken system when the people who are in charge, be honest, they're profiting from the broken system.
That's right.
And it doesn't benefit them to change the system. But in the meantime, we have kids that are losing generations and generations of future growth potential and earning potential because they're in poor, failing schools.
Yes. And that's talk about injustice. It's Ronald Reagan said the soft tyranny of low expectations.
Right. Bigotry of low expectations.
The bigotry of low expectations, and setting people up to fail because them failing is better for the system that you're leading.
Right.
To me, that's a form of evil.
Right.
I don't find any justification in that. And I think this is why I go back to the spiritual masters. The main thing that they did, Jesus chief among them, related to power structures, is they raised consciousness. They pointed it out. And if you raise your own consciousness, and you see this over and over again, I'm a history nerd, thousands of times in history, people that were institutional, like a Martin Luther, had an elevation of consciousness and they changed the system. You don't change the system if you don't elevate consciousness of people. And I think that's the main job that we need to do as people that see problems in society. It's not enough to point them out. That's easy. You can walk outside and find 30 problems to point out. But what are you doing to elevate consciousness so that you can begin to have people use their gifts, their God-given gifts, or their power, their resources to actually change things? To me, that's what social justice is. Social justice isn't a Black Lives Matter flag at your house. That's nice. That's good. I'm glad people do that. Social justice is putting your own resources, including your soul, into something you feel called to change. Without that, it's just sort of platitudinal. It's like changing your Facebook photo when the latest crisis happens, and you're like, oh, now I'm pro whatever or anti this. Like, no, what are you doing with your time and your energy?
That term social justice, I actually did some homework on that because I also like history and wanted to actually discover where that term came from. Mm-hmm. It actually is a Catholic term.
Right.
And it comes
from the liberation theology.
Mm-hmm. Comes from the idea of how do we create a society where the common good is uplifted mm-hmm. as a virtue.
Right.
And so it's like, how do you lift up the entire society, the entire community? Was a concept of social justice. And I think what's happened sometimes it's been used to lift up a portion of the society while denigrating another portion.
Yes,
instead of us bringing together our best and our brightest collectively to say, how can we tackle this problem together? Mm-hmm. Because when we have the solutions that come out of our collective brilliance, collective gifts, collective divine, I think we come up with solutions that the entire community benefits from.
Absolutely. And what's tragic to me is, in many ways, the two-party system in the United States, it's not constitutionally protected. It kind of evolved out of time, over, after the birth of the nation and the writing of the Constitution, is that it served its purpose of this sort of, a foot on the gas, a foot on the brake, or, this balance, this creative tension. In politics in the United States, you used to have opposition. This is my opponent. That's the term. I'm my opponent. About 10 years ago, it became the enemy. And now the media is the enemy, or the other party is the enemy, or another person is the enemy. And that enemy language, all it does is perpetuate hate. And we're in a holy war in some ways between darkness and light right now, between the darkness of extremism and extreme views and dehumanizing views. And this is why I say people that are more moderate or centrist or independent are the largest underrepresented group in the United States, because we see what you said, Keith, like, hey, there's homelessness. Let's get together and figure this out. And then you bump up against people that benefit from its perpetuation, or the border crisis, or immigration reform, or combat vet suicide rates, or fentanyl, crisis. Like, these are solvable problems. The only reason they're not being solved is there's not enough motivation within the power structures that we have to do it, which is another reason why I'm a huge fan of nonprofits and the community good aspect of it. That's the best vehicle, was the best vehicle for change. I think that's changing out to what I refer to as conscious businesses. It was getting involved in those social issues, like Salesforce, Mark Benioff, and his efforts to solve the unhoused people crisis in San Francisco, as an example. We have to get involved if we have power. It's that simple. We can't sit behind our gated community and our big giant 401k or, stock portfolio and deny that there are not problems in the country.
Right. So Justin, I'm curious, and you think about this particular season of your life. What are you excited about?
I'm excited about what we're doing with Massive. In particular, Massive is the company, as I mentioned, that Virginia and I started about a year ago to equip conscious business leaders with the tools and the strategy and the plan to create systemic change. Very excited about that because I feel like we're entering into this age of consciousness where it's that levels of consciousness have much more of an indicator of someone's growth than level of education, for example. I mean, there's a lot of very well-educated people that are mean as hell and believe crazy things. So, but I'm excited about that. I'm excited about AI. I think AI is part of this age of consciousness. It's part of the evolutionary process. I'm not afraid of it. I'm positive about it because, even within as a writer and a poet and someone that I'm a linguist by trade. I'm not afraid of AI. AI makes me better. I'm not afraid of anything that makes me better, in the sense of that. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about Gen Z, Zoomers, and millennials too, and the worldview that they have. Now, there's an element of entitlement and things like that. Sure, entitlement is the opposite. Is what happens when you don't have emotional trauma or neglect.
Right.
You feel entitled. So if you're going to choose something, I guess entitled is better than trauma survivors. But I'm excited about their view, their natural inclusivity, their natural curiosity, their suspicion of power structures, their willingness to speak up. I'm excited about that as well.
That's awesome. I love to ask my guests this question. What do you want your legacy to be? It's an interesting question, Keith, because I don't think I for myself, I would not say this to, I don't think I'm telling anybody else to think this is, I don't think you decide your legacy. I do remember over the years, I've been to a lot of funerals. One thing about growing up in a fundamentalist church, you go to a lot of funerals. Yeah.
Or you read an obituary and it's like, Bob died, of a heart attack at 78 or whatever. And Bob loved to golf, or Susan loved to do cross stitch or collect stamps or whatever. And I was like, man, I do not want my legacy to be my hobbies. That's for sure. Justin loved football. He just watched it nonstop, and so I look at legacy as the energy that's left after I'm gone. What do people carry in their hearts? Like I carry my grandmother in my heart, and she passed away 14 years ago. Or 13 years ago. And that's that warmth. I mean, they talk about this of the two deaths. There's when you die, and then when the last person that knew you personally died, that's your second death. But legacy can transfer that. So we can carry within us the legacy of other people that have, like I feel like a deep kinship with the poet Rumi, as an example, or a deep kinship with the poet Mary Oliver. I didn't know them, but energy doesn't work that way. Energy, even in physics, energy is not created, nor does it go away. It just changes form. And I think it's the leftover energy. And I just want it to be love. I never want, and I've struggled with this because I said at the beginning with hardening myself. Never again do I want anyone that I love to ever doubt that I love them, for whatever reason. And that's, to me, the best legacy there is.
That's awesome. Where can we find out more about Justin Foster and follow you on social media?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Foster Thinking. I'm prolific on posting of thoughts and poems and what I call musings. You can check out our website at massivechange.co. And I'm very findable by design. So you can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook. And, the only thing I'm not active much on anymore is Twitter because of Musk. I don't like him. But but otherwise, I'm very findable. And I have a Substack community as well. So, and I always offer this too to people that if you heard something that I said today, or you read something I wrote and you just want to have a conversation, just message me. I'm happy to talk. I think that we meet people for a reason. Just even this conversation that you and I are having, Keith, this happened for some particular reason to somebody. Either we're going to get benefit out of it, or somebody's going to listen to our conversation and get a little bit of hope, a little bit of encouragement. Something's going to happen. And I believe deeply in mentoring. So reach out to anybody. You can reach out to me for a conversation. I never turn anyone away.
Well, Justin, thanks so much for taking the time to have this conversation, and may you continue to find conscious leaders to help them to raise their conscience level and be a positive business impact on the world and the communities.
Thank you so much, Keith. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for the great questions.
Thanks for listening to Becoming Bridge Builder. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast, please subscribe and share it with others. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at bkeithhaney and on Getter and Twitter at RevHeadpin or on his website at alightbreaksthrough.org. Thanks again and tune in next time.
Do you know that most entrepreneurs hit a revenue ceiling and have no idea why? They're working harder, spending more money, running more ads, but revenue stays flat. My friend Dr. Noah St. John calls this the invisible break. He's giving our listeners a free revenue ceiling audit to help you see what's really holding you back. You'll get a free 30-day membership to Noah Bot, giving you access to Dr. Noah's 30 years of experience to help you reach your next level. But hurry, because there's only 50 available this month. So if you're tired of being stuck at the same revenue level and want to finally break through, get your free revenue ceiling audit at drnoahvault.com in the affiliate link that'll be listed in the show notes.
Thanks for listening to Becoming Bridge Builder. If you enjoyed this episode and want to help support the podcast, please subscribe and share it with others. Post about it on social media or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on Instagram at bkeithhaney and on Getter and Twitter at RevHeadpin. Thanks again and tune in next time.